Hi, welcome, beloveds. Welcome to this week's Craniosacral conversation, which I titled See Tactile Afferent Nerve Fibers. Those are nerves in the skin, and they are also called stroking fibers because they are activated with stroking sensations, stroking experiences, and it very much so has been like laboratory boiled down to like skin to skin stroking because like they'll have experiments with like paintbrushes almost going over someone's skin of like the speed that activates those nerve firings and like heat, and it's the same temperature that people then report saying what's pleasant is the same temperature it ends up being as human fingertips. So it's very much the stroking fibers because they start firing and responding to and with stroking of skin, which researchers are talking about is like that's evidence for like our socialness as species, because a lot of these fibers are also like on the back, which wouldn't make sense for self-soothing purposes. So there is that sensation of how back touch on the back with the back is so pleasurable, comforting, because there's that reward pathway for relational ways of living. And so I was able to learn about these C tactile nerve fibers, C tactile afferents, from this documentary, How Does Touch Affect Our Mental and Physical Health, through DW documentaries. And the part that I thought felt the most maybe new or interesting or just kind of like resonated with me was this moment where they said that the part of the brain that lights up, gets engaged from the relationship with these C tactile afferents, is the part of the brain that has positive feelings, has our perception of others, but also has our perception of self. That's a similar part of the brain. And so let me get that wording right. The processing of positive emotions, how we think of others, and self perception is what this part of the brain, though obviously, we are holistic beings, no one area is just one thing. This is just how scientists can study and map out brain. But so this area did light up, and according to other research, this area brain has been connected with those themes. And I just thought it felt really significant that the area of the brain that's getting lit up from touch also has connections with self-perception. That's not just being able to gauge perception of others of like, is this safe touch, unsafe touch, desired touch, undesired touch, but also how we are touched shapes our self-perception as well. And many people have maybe been aware of this, lived with this. This might be bringing up memories and wisdom that each of you carry when thinking about how touch shapes not only our view of the external world, but our view of ourselves as well. And I just wanted to kind of have this video be a place to honor that, for practitioners to ground and root in that reminder that how a practitioner is bringing touch is a part of someone's self-perception, but also for people who receive touch in a session, out of a session, which is all of us in some ways, that that awareness that touch does shape self-perception, and everything's just information, right? So it can help to maybe piece together some parts of stories people have of themselves in the world. This information might help like color in some connections, some memories, some world views, kind of weave together some stories for a person, but it also can be information going forward, right? So it can be information for the past to be like, okay, now that helps me maybe like create a pattern, connect some dots, for like, oh, I see how maybe this led to this in my life. That's just information for being able to move forward, right? And how does a person want to be able to make informed decisions moving forward about who a person lets close to them, and then that awareness of like more and more becoming embodied ourselves, so we make conscious contact, we make conscious touch. I had talked in another previous video about becoming more embodied and being aware of gestures, eye, facial movements, and facial muscle messages that we're sending each other, because as social beings, we very much so can pick up on these. Of course, being social beings is on a continuum. All identities are on a continuum. They can shift and change among people in a single person. So I want to honor all the ways that people are social beings, or all the languages that people speak, verbal and nonverbal. And in that video, I was talking a lot about gestures and those nonverbal ways of communicating, and how craniosacral sessions can help a person become more embodied, more self-aware of every movement, not just our big movements, but even those facial, eye, muscle movements that help us send messages to each other, have that communication. And I've been reading this book, The Alphabet and the Goddess, The Alphabet versus the Goddess, talking about how brains can be shaped by the different mediums of communication, and that so much of a culture can be understood by what medium of communication is the main communication flow, the main messenger, and how the written word um, needs to be linearly engaged with, which creates linear thinking, going from word to word to word. But an image, a symbol, creates this holistic, spontaneous, all at once experience in the brain. This gestalt, like an image is more than just their individual pieces, because images are taken as a whole. And so thinking about like, do we experience each other that way, in that holistic, spontaneous, like the symbols of each moment of our facial expressions is so much information, right, to be absorbing all at once, integrating all at once through just those images. And is touch similar or different than that? Is touch similar or different? Is the predictability of a stroking motion, is that predictability what's comforting or not? Something to be curious about. Um, because in some ways they say that that's why self-touch isn't as stimulating, because there's that predictability. But I also feel like stroking is kind of predictable if another person's doing it as well. So just ideas to be curious about, to bring more embodiment in ourselves, and more appreciation for what these bodies are digesting and integrating. So much information being absorbed all at once, right? And then being able to be more a part of how those stories, how that information gets shaped in our bodies, right? So much about culture, especially if it's like dominant, oppressive culture, is about trying to create these shortcuts in brains to have stories only go certain ways, information only lead to certain already prepackaged stories. And so, how can a person become more embodied, so they're aware of these processes as they're happening, and be able to hold multiple stories of like, this information is coming in, but I get to choose what stories live in my body based on that information. So becoming more and more embodied can help a person be in the present moment and being able to be aware of these stories being formed, and those stories can be, like I said earlier, about the external world as well as about self perception. So I just want to hold so much care for people whose self perceptions have been shaped by experiences of touch, by people who were unaware of the power of touch or misusing the power of touch, but remembering that this is information, and so if it can be used one way, it can also be used multiple other ways, and that the power of touch can be connective and healing and consensual to create self-esteem for people, confidence for people, assurance for people. And so as craniosacral practitioners, how are we doing that? How is the touch in a session, and what are the preparations a craniosacral practitioner is doing beforehand, knowing that they are not only holding a person's maybe past stories during that session, but also shaping the future stories. And that's why it's so important too to always be reiterating that sessions are co-created, that these sessions are co-created, and also again just getting to understand and play with the difference between touch from another person and self-touch, because all of us can offer craniosacral to ourselves, but what is it that happens when there's a practitioner as well there, that feeling that someone else cares enough about this person's life path to also slow down and hold space for touching in with that life path and communicating with those relationships, and cares enough about this person being all their relationships and making sure all those relationships can be in communication with each other. And so I just wanted to introduce this key term for people, because sometimes it helps to have a name that that is attached to other resources of doing more research. And as I always say, research could be just curiosity, observation with self, could be dreaming, dancing, or researching academic papers, books. However, research is for you, if it's conversations with people. Now there's this term that gets to be rolled around in your mouth and see how it feels with these tactile afferent nerve fibers that are in skin, and thinking about what does stroking offer bodies, and what does touch tell a person about themselves. I also think that it's important to mention that these parts of the brain being connected, or these perceptions of other people and these self perceptions being in the same area of the brain, really does also blur the line, right, between the difference between self and other, external and internal, that these are relationships that aren't as far apart or distinguished as they seem to be, but can be as well. It's like being able to travel back and forth, right? We each live in our own world, but we get to visit each other's worlds, and just continuing to get to be curious and playful about that, I think is something that is meaningful for craniosacral practitioners and engagers, about that, because like I've said before, sometimes when I'm receiving, I might become very aware of the craniosacral practitioner's body rhythms as well. That almost creates this like womb-like experience, the craniosacral practitioner identified for me. And so life is so much about trying to balance those relationships between self and other. And if astrology is a language that you speak, or a way for you to have an additional story in your life about timing or life themes. This is making me think about how the North Node and South Node, which are moon nodes, are moving away from Taurus and Scorpio and into Libra and Aries. And Libra is traditionally referred to as a relationship sign. Aries is known as that self sign, understanding the self. And so it seems like this maybe is a theme that might be with us for a little bit about understanding how touch can be this element in self and other relationships, and that we get to just be more and more informed decision makers about that. Life doesn't have to just happen to us. It is that relationship, that play, that back and forth. I'm really grateful to Susan Raffa, who talks about like we are life's ability to understand itself. And so we are just these expressions of elements of life. And we get to be curious about when there are combinations and interactions, and just get to be curious about that. And like I said, just become more and more informed decision makers around that. So let me slow down. I feel like I wanted to, since I'm talking about language and communication styles, I guess I also wanted to just weave in that I read a research article recently that was published, was it in 22 or 23? So more up to date about Frost and Frost language, since like how we self-identify and identify others is meaningful, and wanting to update about Frost and Frost language for people who identify as being people on the autism spectrum. That there's different language choices, and the research does say that there isn't actually a clear defined preference, but there for what people want to be referred to as, but there is a clear defined um oh, was it, oh, I should have like updated, but I'm like update my readings of this, but I'm just spontaneously like adding this into this video, but that there isn't like a clear define like what isn't appreciated, but there is a clear define what is more appreciated, and it is saying like a person on the autism spectrum instead of saying an autistic person or a person with autism. The phrase more so that's appreciated and that's being offered now, again, always ask people what they prefer, but is person on autism spectrum, because then it's like a connection with a community, right? And it offers that spectrum element that so many of our identities are on a spectrum, a continuum, open to that fluidity and that change. But there are just different preferences for seeing these identities we carry, right? As if like some of those parts of ourselves are closer or further than us, that's what language can kind of communicate sometimes. So that's a difference between like autistic person and person with autism. How close is that person wanting to bring that part of themselves? And then, like I said before, the language being offered now that's new is person on autism spectrum, that shows that like they said similar to like person on other spectrums, a person on like a team, or it gives a sense of like being a part of something, and that's a lot of times what a label identity can offer is just being a part of something that then there can be that communication, right? If we all identify in this one way, it can show, we can read each other's articles and do those searches, but I definitely also long for people being able to create their own names for their experiences of themselves, because the more we show each other possibilities, the more we remember how many possibilities they are. So with language, there is that like pros and cons of if we all share a term, we can all kind of research that term. But if we create our own terms, then we can remember those possibilities, and it can show a little bit more of like how each person uniquely experiences this maybe through line shared experience. More and more encouragement for people to self-identify how they want. So craniosacral practitioners might be talking to people who identify as a depressed person, a person with depression, or a person on depression spectrums, or they could identify as someone, like talking with someone who is like, I identify as having like heaviness with me or something like that, something that gives a more visual representation or more visceral representation and more unique personalized representation of what that person's specifically experiencing for themselves. So just wanted to add that at the end of this video about remembering to touch in with the people that we're seeing in session about how they identify, and not always just going to those quick pre-identified terms of saying like, oh, I experience like sleepiness, fogginess, so it's depression. But it's like encouraging people to get to feel in like what's actually here. Like an artist teacher once said, don't draw what you know, draw what you see. So how much of our life can we keep practicing actually being embodied and feeling out what is here and what am I sensing, picking up on, what do I know, what am I learning about, instead of just these falling into these prepackaged answers and experiences and names and terms. But in craniosacral sessions, maybe craniosacral sessions can be that time of getting to feel more intimately, more specifically, more relationally what certain part of ourselves feel like, to maybe create our own terms and names for those experiences. It doesn't have to just be called depression that has then all these other connotations with it, these other people's stories, or maybe people want that. So just always, again, just providing options. So hopefully craniosacral practitioners and all practitioners, they're just learning multiple techniques, multiple learnings to have more in their baskets to offer people as offerings, not telling people what needs to be done or shaping sessions based on just what the practitioner is learning. But a practitioner hopefully is learning multiple techniques and phrases to offer more suggestions, more possibilities, more offerings for a person to get to choose whose session it is. So again, like always touch in with the person, go at that pace of relationships, go at that co-creating a session mentality. But this can be something that craniosacral can offer as well. Like what can happen in a craniosacral session, that's what I make these videos about, is to like expand the possibilities, these reminders, like what a craniosacral session can be shaped around, can be played with, and this can be one of those of that. It can be a time to get to really feel certain sides of self come forward, and feel certain sides of self come forward and get to then name those. And remembering too, like we can be people of multiple names. That can be true of our sides of ourselves. Yeah, just they can hold multiple names. Sometimes they can be called depression, sometimes they can be called something else, sometimes they can have those hyphens. Getting more playful with language, or remembering the nonverbal as well could be gestures or something. Because I really want to empower people, right? Or like remind people of their power, that like live your communication style that is your strongest. If it's not language, verbal language, written language, that's okay. Why weaken yourself, dampen yourself? Because your messages are needed. Each person's messages and gifts are needed. And I just wanted to remind people that you get to do that. You get to um, communicate in your preferred communication style, and get to shape your life around that. If it's the people you are able to communicate with who understand you, or if it's the job career paths, right? I know capitalism can limit some of our choices, for some of our choices. A lot of jobs are very like verbal, but if a person can have more of their life be, if their language is touch, um, being a craniosacral practitioner, or I've been watching so many bat rescue videos, being a little bat baby swaddler and great feeder. If a person is like, it's more their language's expressions, right? There are so many art forms, like theater, where there is expression that communicates so much, modeling. So I just feel that coming through me, of just reminding people, like, you get to communicate in your preferred communication preference, and don't always have to shape yourself around what a person feels like they have to communicate. And I really love answering questions the way I want to answer them, even though I can kind of sense the way someone is like guiding me to answer. It's like, well, but the way you ask that question, like, I could answer it how I want to, or feels more true to me. Um, and then you can practice consent as well, as like saying, like, are you consenting to the long version of the story or the short version, or something like that. So communication, right? It's a time to play. And so hopefully these videos just give you reminders to do that. Looking at my notes, I'm like, actually, I might have that article written down about person first language. So let me see if I do. Or is it in another sheet of paper? It would have just been so nice and easy if it was in this notebook. But as I'm searching, oh, I'm getting more sad. As I'm searching, I can tell you about some weekend updates I know about here in the homelands of the Dakhóta people, and then the Anishinaabe and HoChunk people here in Minnesota, Makoce, Bede Ota Atunwe, Minneapolis, in Minnesäska, St. Paul. That I know Pangea World Theater has their gala at Moon Palace Books, I believe, like starting at 6:30 p.m., but going like 6:30 to 8. It's free. There's music. There's food. So that's one of, yeah, why is it not in this notebook? That's one of the events I know about this weekend. That's the Saturday 17th, Moon Palace Books, 3032 Minnehaha Avenue. Oh, that article's not here, which is so weird because some of the other articles I was reading about were there, but not that one. Yeah, what else is happening this weekend? I mean, always check out the Cultural Wellness Center's events. Actually, the Cultural Wellness Center is having an event at the Midtown Global Market this weekend, so look that up. Saturday as well, Saturday the 17th. So check out the Cultural Wellness Center social media for that. Those details. I will be offering Craniosacral there. I think my time slot's like 3 p.m. I'll have to relook that up, like 3 to 4 p.m. But there'll be so many practitioners there. Juneteenth is coming up, so this is the Juneteenth event with the Cultural Wellness Center. Come meet the practitioners that understand that a person's health is intimately connected with their sense of belonging, their sense of connection with ancestral ways, their sense of connection with ancestral food practices, plant relationships, and the cultural wellness helps people connect with those parts of themselves, be a more holistic person, a more embodied person, getting to be their gifts and their essence and their wholeness. So that is this weekend. And also with the Cultural Wellness Center, who does make all these craniosacral videos possible, and I'm so grateful. The Cultural Wellness Center has other practitioners who create these free videos as well. So check out free Zumba, free sound and breath healing, yoga, dancing. So grateful to be a part of that circle. And I hope that this week is all that you need in a meaningful and balanced way. I hope that you have access to the encouragement and resources you need and desire to get to be, share, feel, and nourish the gifts that you are. I hope that this week feels like your favorite song is dancing alongside you. Thank you so much for joining this craniosacral conversation. I just identify as a craniosacral practitioner, which just means that I practice again and again how body lives relationships. So thank you for practicing with me. I'm always practicing. I hope that this week feels like your favorite song is dancing alongside you, and I hope that this video offered you some key terms. Engage with what resonates, leave what doesn't. I'm always trying to do that school mentality of having to like be perfect and learn it all. If there was just one idea that resonated with you, that's enough. That's meaningful. If there was one key term that now you have to go play with, that's really meaningful as well. So thank you so much for joining and joining me in my new home. I live with my sister and her partner and their 2 cats, and we all moved. So I'm looking for more little spots for these craniosacral videos, and this is one spot I created and found. So thank you for sharing this moment together in my new home.